What's up guys, Acerthorn here, and welcome to part 2 of my Ideal Wrestling Games series. I hope you've been having a good time, both listening to me rant about what's wrong with wrestling games, as well as posting your own suggestions about how these games should work. Today, I would like to discuss the primary game modes in the wrestling games, the MyCareer mode, the Unuiverse mode, and the potential return of a GM mode. So without any further ado, let's get started. For several years now, the Unuiverse mode has been the franchise's sandbox mode. In years past, the closest we've had to such a mode was create a pay-per-view, but that only allowed you to book one show at a time. As I mentioned last episode, I have always dreamed of owning my own wrestling show, and the Unuiverse mode is the closest I can currently come to living that dream vicariously. However, to put it mildly, Unuiverse mode is a complete waste of resources. At best, it serves as merely a match organizer. It helps you keep track of who won and lost, something you could very easily do with your own spreadsheet app. In WWE 2K18, they tried to up the ante by giving each wrestler a goal. This, however, had absolutely zero bearing on the Unuiverse mode. Their AI still fought to win their matches just as hard as if they were in exhibition mode. Their AI still tried to score as high as possible on promos. Giving the characters a goal was merely another organizational app, again, something you could very easily just keep track of yourself. But even the parts of Unuiverse mode that seemed to have a point were completely broken. Case in point, the rivalries. Now, for those of you who don't watch wrestling, for whatever reason you're here, rivalries are the backbone of wrestling storylines. Nearly every wrestling storyline involves two or more wrestlers in a rivalry against each other. However, in Unuiverse mode, the rivalry system simply doesn't work. All it seems to do is trigger a couple of cutscenes whenever the two wrestlers in the rivalry interact with each other. But if Unuiverse mode is supposed to be the game's sandbox mode, why can't I select the exact cutscene that happens? Oh, sure, I can schedule one guy to run in on his rival's match, but my manual tinkering with the rivalry effectively ends the rivalry. In order for the rivalry to continue and be logged in Unuiverse mode's statistics, I have to use whatever cutscene the game randomly decides to use. That is not sandbox mode. The only way I can enjoy the allure of Unuiverse mode's fantasy booking element is if I forego the in-game rivalry system entirely and just manually book my wrestlers to interact with each other however I choose. Granted, I don't lose much if I do that because the rivalry system itself doesn't really do anything or tell any stories, but it's the principle of the thing. So Unuiverse mode has a long way to go before it truly realizes its goal of being the ultimate fantasy booking mode for the games. So how do we fix this? Well, for starters, remember the story designer mode I mentioned last episode that I wanted to see come back? Yep, one of the easiest ways to spruce up Unuiverse mode would be to allow me to import custom storylines for use in Unuiverse mode. Have those storylines exist in place of the current rivalry system. At the very least, you should give me the ability to select my own cutscenes and have those manual cutscenes be equally valid means of keeping the rivalry going. You should also give me the ability to have more than 3 rivalries. At least give me the option for 7 rivalries at a time, since pay-per-views in Unuiverse mode always have 7 matches on their cards. But honestly, there's no reason not to let me have as many rivalries as I want. Remember rule of thumb number 2. I could, in theory, advance up to 4 rivalries per match as long as I use 8-man matches. With a maximum 7 matches per show and as many promos per show as there are matches, I could, in theory, have as many as 35 rivalries be advanced per show and have it all fit into one show. While we're at it, let me have rivalries that involve more than just 2 parties. Currently, the only rivalries I can book are 1 vs 1 and 2 vs 2 rivalries. These get really repetitive really fast, especially when all the rivalries are the same and there is absolutely no story being told within them. If you want us to use our imagination and come up with our own storylines for these rivalries, then give us a fucking story designer, you bongholes! I'm gonna tell you a story. When I was waiting for the release of WWE SmackDown vs. Raw 2009, I read that they were getting rid of GM mode. I was so pissed off at this news that I boycotted the entire franchise for several years. The next wrestling game I played was WWE 2K16. Yeah, I missed out on the entire era where story designer was a mode, because that's just how pissed off I was that they were getting rid of GM mode. So, naturally, I want to see GM mode make a comeback, right? Right? You would be shocked. Believe it or not, I would be completely content if story designer, and only story designer, made a comeback. Not because GM mode wasn't fun, but because I now have something even better. Total Extreme Wrestling is an indie game that focuses almost exclusively on wrestling booking. Unlike the GM mode of yesteryear, this game actually has a lot more features and a lot more control over how you handle the show. You can select who wins each match, how exactly the match ends, and even various things to happen within the match. Honestly, if you want a good GM mode, that game right there is what you want. But if we must have GM mode return in the WWE 2K games, how would I want it done? Well, for starters, I would like it to be a subset of Unuiverse mode. The ability to turn GM mode on or off should be a feature in Unuiverse mode rather than a standalone mode. This would include the aforementioned ability to import custom storylines into Unuiverse mode and have them instantly be compatible with the GM mode. The Meltzer-style match rating that was introduced in WWE 2K15 should be the primary deciding factor in the success of your matches. For promos, perhaps you could find a way of converting the points you get from the promo into a rating of 5 stars. The average ratings for each segment would be the basis for the average rating of each show. The popularity of each wrestler on the card is what dictates what your ratings are and how much you get from merchandise sales. But more popular wrestlers would also charge more to be signed. The wrestlers would gain popularity by participating in high-rated matches as well as scoring high on promos. Of course, there are a handful of things from the old GM mode that I despised and which I would definitely want to see nerfed. For example, wrestlers gained the same popularity when they won a match, but numbers advantages didn't matter. This means that it was most beneficial to put your guys in 3-on-1 handicap matches against a single jobber so that you can get 3 guys over at once instead of just 1. Please nerf that. If you have a numbers advantage in your matches, the popularity the winner gets should be divided by the number of allies they have more than their opponents. So in a 3-on-1 handicap match, if the trio wins, they should only get 1/3 of the popularity they would have gotten by winning a 1-on-1 match at the same star rating. Whereas the singles wrestler would get 3 times the popularity if he managed to win. This would not only keep the game balanced, but it would also be realistic, since that's how handicap matches in real life usually work. Another thing I would want to see rebalanced from the old GM mode is that specialty match types and legends should lose their potency if you use them too much. In the old GM mode, it was best to make every single match on a pay-per-view into a Hell in a Cell match, and you should have at least 4 legends on your roster so that you could use the different storylines that required legends, as they usually gave the best ratings. I would prefer if legends were allowed to be used only 3 times per year. I don't simply mean that using The Undertaker 3 times per year, and then using Roddy Piper 3 times per year, and then using Steve Austin 3 times per year. I mean using 3 legends 3 times per year, period. If you use them more often than that, they should lose their status as legends and you should stop getting the appropriate bonuses from them. Same thing with specialty matches. Specialty matches should feel, well, special. If you use more than 1 of each type of specialty match each year, the ratings and draws you get from booking such a match should produce diminishing returns. However, unlike the legends, you could use each specialty match type once each, a single Hell in a Cell match per year, a single TLC match per year, etc. The medium tier match types like Steel Cage and No Holds Barred could be used more often than once per year before producing diminishing returns. For example, 6 cage matches per year before you get diminishing returns, and maybe 12 no-holds-barred matches per year. However, with the exception of the storylines centered around Legends, which, since they cannot be used more than 3 times per year anyway, we don't need to worry about spamming them, all storylines should be considered equal. In the old GM mode, you were forced to select only 4 and 5-star storylines because those were the only ones that the audience wouldn't get tired of after the first month. Instead, the success of storylines should be entirely dependent on your wrestlers' abilities to get them over. Now, that's not to say that I want all storylines to be the same. The storylines we select should dictate which cutscenes we see that advance that storyline, although I do want the ability to change the cutscenes manually, as I mentioned earlier. For example, a love triangle storyline involving 2 guys and a woman would obviously be different than a one-on-one storyline and therefore would require a separate storyline be selected. However, one thing I would like to see is, again, diminishing returns if I reuse the same storylines over and over. Ever since WWE 2K15, MyCareer has been 2K's substitute for a story mode. If I didn't know any better, I would suspect that they were using MyCareer as an excuse not to have to write stories for us to play through, as Push Square very clearly demonstrates with their video about WWE 2K15's MyCareer mode.
Now the real crux of what's wrong with MyCareer is just how little there is going on each week. It's just a match. There's no story. Every week you finish a match, the general manager says via a text box, "That was a good match, but there's nothing for you at the moment. I will let you know if we're going to line you up for some kind of push." It's actually probably just about the most realistic thing in the game, to be honest. A lot of wrestlers struggle to get to the pay-per-view level, but from a gameplay perspective it's so goddamn boring, because you're just sitting there playing these meaningless matches continuously against the same opponents over and over again.
Yeah, what he said. WWE 2K18 alleviated this problem to some degree by writing actual storylines for us and a free roaming backstage area, and 2K19 gave us a linear storyline that was more interesting than 2K18's MyCareer mode, but was over way too fast. First, let's talk about the free roaming backstage area. Now, in theory, this was an incredible concept, but you never really did anything with it. It honestly felt like one of those mods in the alpha stage where you designed the world, but the only things you could interact with were those that you were meant to interact with to make the story progress. For the most part, you could very easily have told the same story simply by jump cutting from one cutscene to the next. I can count on one hand the number of times I felt using the free roaming backstage area was used in a way that couldn't have been done just as well or better by using jump cuts. The free roaming backstage was a great concept, and it could have given the game an RPG-like feel, but instead of it feeling like an RPG, it felt more like the alpha stage of a mod, where you created a game space for you to walk around in but haven't gotten around to writing any quest content for it. Please fix that. So how exactly would I want to see the free roaming backstage area used to its full potential? Well, for starters, whenever I walk up to a person, give me 4 options to interact with them, 1 for each face button on the controller. Let me talk to them, flirt with them, brawl with them, or mock them. Flirting can be done between members of the same sex if that's your thing, because hey, this is 2018 and restricting our ability to do that is total bullshit. Meanwhile, brawling and mocking will usually result in a rivalry with that wrestler being started. That transitions me to my next point on how to fix MyCareer. Rivalries and storylines should be triggered based on what you do in the game. Starting a feud with somebody should have consequences based on how you initiated the feud. If you flirted with a girl, her jealous boyfriend could show up behind you and beat the tar out of you, starting a feud that way. Whereas if you run through somebody else's gym bag, the ensuing rivalry with him should resolve around you having no respect for his privacy, and so on and so forth. The rivalries should also play out differently depending on what your status was in the company at the time the rivalry began. For example, if you're part of a tag team, storylines should reflect that you have a partner to come to your aid. If you acquire a girlfriend via the aforementioned flirt dialogue option, storylines should include her serving as your advocate to the GM, as well as being the target of heels to attack in order to push your buttons. The wrestlers you are eligible to enter feuds with should differ depending on your relative spot on the card. For example, you should not be eligible to enter feuds with the premium guys like John Cena or AJ Styles until you yourself enter competition for the world title. Meanwhile, the storylines you are eligible for should differ depending on the time of year. For example, January through March should put you in storylines revolving around the Royal Rumble match and the upcoming WrestleMania, while the month of June should revolve around qualifying for and subsequently winning Money in the Bank unless you're already world champ to begin with. The storylines you qualify for should also be dependent on what you have done in previous storylines. For example, if you are undefeated, the game should put you in storylines that revolve around people challenging your undefeated streak. Face wrestlers should constantly have unfair stuff thrown at them by heel general managers to end their undefeated streak, and so on and so forth. Furthermore, once you are in a storyline, the storyline should branch depending on what you do. This is one of the biggest gripes I have with the storylines of WWE 2K18's and 19's MyCareer modes. If the story calls for you to win a match, you have to win that match. If you lose, you have to redo the match. If the storyline calls for you to lose a match, you have to lose. If you defy orders and beat your opponent, you have to do the match over again. There should be consequences to losing at pivotal moments. These consequences do not necessarily have to be that the storyline changes. For example, if you lose a match where the storyline requires you to win, then the storyline ends. You then have to go the remainder of the month wrestling exhibition matches with no story, and you have to wait until week 1 of the next month before you are eligible for another storyline. That last part is in place to ensure that the next storyline will always culminate at the pay-per-view, unlike in WWE 2K17, where storylines would begin and end mid-month, which makes no sense. But even then, small changes to the story can happen depending on if you win or lose. You don't have to write completely new storylines for branching paths. For example, at Backlash 2018, Seth Rollins faced Dolph Ziggler in an Iron Man match for the Intercontinental Championship. At the Go Home Raw for that month, Rollins lost a match to Ziggler's partner Drew McIntyre. Per the stipulation of that match, McIntyre winning that match meant he was allowed to accompany Ziggler to the ring during the Iron Man match. His subsequent interference in that match played a huge role in Ziggler winning. This would be a great idea to have in the MyCareer storylines. One that would require minimal scripting on your part. Or how about this idea? In WWE 2K18's Money in the Bank story arc, you were tasked with taking out several of the champion's rivals so they couldn't compete in the Money in the Bank ladder match. You had to win, otherwise you had to redo the match. Imagine if, instead, getting your opponents to red limb health during the match caused their spots in the Money in the Bank ladder match to be replaced with jobbers, making your victory in the ladder match that much easier. This would be a great way to have your actions from one week to another have consequences without having to write entirely new storylines for those branching paths. Also, I would like to see the storylines be better than they were in WWE 2K18. By better, I mean the storylines should be about more than just winning matches or winning championships for their own sake. Of course, championships are important in wrestling, but they aren't the only way to tell a story. I would like some stories to be about things other than championships. If championships are on the line, I would at least like there to be stories that involve more than just that. This wouldn't even be that difficult to do if you have the creativity. Here, I'll give you 7 stories that I came up with after just a single evening of brainstorming. 5 of these are singles storylines, and 2 of them are tag team storylines. However, the important thing is that while championships could be on the line during these storylines, the stories would often work just as well without a title being on the line. Are you ready? Okay, here we go. So as you can clearly see, Coming up with handcrafted, interesting storylines is not that hard. Maybe actually programming them into the game is a lot easier said than done, but if you're a seasoned game designer, you should have that down to a science. Merely coming up with the plans for the storylines? Oh, just get 4 or 5 guys to sit at a table and throw ideas around for a few hours. You can easily come up with about 5 or 6 dozen ideas for storylines in a single setting. Speaking of 5 or 6 dozen monthly storylines, that transitions me to my next point. The MyCareer mode needs to last longer. In WWE 2K18, you only had 1 year's worth of storylines. Actually, you had even less than that, since there was a plot point where your character rage quit after failing to win his Money in the Bank cash-in match, and so you skipped over a couple of months and cut straight to January. So you didn't even have a whole year's worth of stuff. The idea that you go from WWE's newest signee to winning the world title at WrestleMania inside a single year is preposterous. Granted, real-life WWE is currently in a phase where people get brought up from NXT and are almost immediately thrust into the world title picture. Finn Balor, for instance, was the first guy in history to win a world title at his first main roster pay-per-view, whereas Shinsuke Nakamura was challenging Jinder Mahal for the WWE title only a few months after his main roster debut, and then went on to win the Royal Rumble during his first year on the main roster. However, what 2K fails to realize is that these guys are riding a tidal wave of momentum from the literal years they have spent in NXT. For the first time in WWE's history, their developmental territory has a nationwide TV deal and is also broadcast on the WWE Network. So for the first time in WWE's history, its developmental territory is able to be consumed by WWE's entire fan base, not just those who happen to be in the area where their developmental territory is set up in. So whereas previously wrestlers debuting on the main roster had to completely start over from scratch as complete unknowns and had to build their fan base from the ground up, modern-day main roster debuts already have a huge fan base and have made a name for themselves. We don't even have that in the games. In the MyCareer mode for WWE 2K18, we only spend 3 months in NXT. I barely know the first names of half these people backstage, and the few that I do know come from me seeing them on the main roster like Asuka. It seems that the developers wanted to use NXT merely as the tutorial for the MyCareer mode, teaching you the basic game mechanics before calling you up to the main roster where they take off the training wheels. That's fine if you want to do it that way, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you don't want us to slowly and painstakingly develop a fan base in NXT so we can hit the ground running on the main roster, then you should make the main roster last a lot longer than a single year. Ideally, I would like the storylines in MyCareer mode to last at least 4 years. For the first 6 months, you're in NXT. For 3 months, you were involved in non-title storylines just to help you get a feel for how these storylines actually work. Starting in month 4, you then enter contention for the NXT Championship or the NXT Tag Team Championship, depending on whether you're a singles wrestler or part of a tag team, winning a number 1 contenders match and facing the champion at the month 4 pay-per-view. You then defend the title during month 5, and in month 6, Triple H tells you that you're called up to the main roster, so you drop the title in the month 6 pay-per-view. Let's make the month 6 pay-per-view a triple threat or fatal 4-way match so you can lose the title without losing your undefeated streak if you have an undefeated streak going. Months 7 through 9 are spent on the main roster in non-title storylines. In month 10, aka January, you are asked to participate in the Royal Rumble. But as soon as you enter, a non-interactive cutscene shows you being eliminated instantly, since it's not yet time for you to be in the world title picture. You then have a non-title feud for month 11, and for month 12, you'll put in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal at WrestleMania. In Year 2, you enter contention for either the mid-card or tag team titles, depending on whether or not you're in a tag team with someone. Imagine if, on month 13, you win a number 1 contenders match to earn a mid-card or tag team title shot, only for the heel champion to get himself disqualified to keep the title. Month 14, you get a rematch in a no DQ match, where you win the title, and on month 15, the former champion gets his rematch. After you beat him in the rematch, you can then go on to do 6 or 7 more monthly title defenses before ultimately dropping the belt in month 23 and losing your rematch on Raw or SmackDown, also being automatically eliminated from the Royal Rumble via cutscene. If you are part of a tag team, failing to regain the tag team titles will cause you and your partner to split up and have a blow-off match at WrestleMania. Otherwise, you're put in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal again. Starting in month 25, you are now eligible to feud with the top guys like Roman Reigns or Samoa Joe. Spend about 6 months doing that in non-title storylines, and in month 30, you earn your first world title match. However, you are screwed out of the title through some chicanery. Maybe the champion gets himself disqualified, or maybe some stable members interfere and cost you the match. The important thing is that for months 30 to 33, you chase the world title but are repeatedly screwed out of it. In month 34, you enter the Royal Rumble for the 3rd time in your career. Only this time, there's no cutscene and you can actually win. If you don't win, the winner will challenge for that title that isn't on your current brand, so you would be eligible to compete for the number 1 contender spot for your brand's world title during month 35. In month 36, you challenge for the world title at WrestleMania, and you finally win the world title at the grandest stage of them all. Starting in month 37, you are now officially the guy. You may lose the world title and have to challenge for it again, but your status as a main eventer is now etched in stone, and storylines will reflect that. Whereas before, you were the one picking fights with and interrupting the promos of top guys like Daniel Bryan and Brock Lesnar, you're now the guy who lower guys target with backstage brawls and promo interruptions. You used to be the hunter, now you are the prey. These storylines will continue on until month 48, whereas 2K storylines will then come to an end. However, even after month 48, I would still like the ability to use the aforementioned story designer to keep MyCareer mode going indefinitely. We can simply download custom storylines off Community Creations. These custom storylines would be specially made for MyCareer mode. By that I mean you can't select which wrestlers actually participate in them. In Unuiverse mode, if you download a love triangle storyline off Community Creations, I could choose which 2 men and which 1 woman I wanted to be in that storyline. But for MyCareer, everything except the MyPlayer character would be fixed by the custom storyline. Downloading these custom storylines would give the MyCareer mode effectively infinite replay value. I would also like the ability to rate these storylines so that people can avoid the bad ones, as well as give red flags to storylines such as breaks the game or contains sexually explicit content, so others will know to stay clear of those storylines unless they specifically want their wrestling games to have boobies. That about does it for the Universe, GM, and Career modes. However, there is one important part of any wrestling game that I have yet to cover. The wrestling game mechanics. Yeah, fancy that, having to talk about wrestling gameplay in a video series about wrestling games. Well, tune in next week and I'll discuss how the perfect wrestling game should handle its match and promo mechanics. For the time being, however, if you enjoyed this discussion, be sure to like this video and share it with your friends. Also, check out some of my other discussion videos by clicking on the playlist icon you see in the bottom right corner of this video, and be sure to subscribe for more in-depth discussion and analysis of your favorite video games. Last but not least, check out some of my Let's Plays on this channel, where I take a more lighthearted approach to these games and just have a good time. In the meantime, however, I am Acerthorn, and I will see you guys later.